Today, now that we're all we took a breath, we grabbed some water or coffee or another mimosa, and we are moving up from the heart space. I'm going to ask you to come into all three of your intelligences and meet me here with your head space, your gut space, and your heart space. And that is because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is women and failure. Now, when I tell people that I'm an expert in women and failure, you would think that I just told them that at night I dress up as a unicorn and practice my curtsy. And I don't know why that is, except that I know that we do not like to talk about failure. Especially women, we do not like to talk about failure. Why is that? Anybody?
Shame.
Shame, fear, what else?
Vulnerability.
Guilt. We want to be strong for everybody else. Who relates to that? Raise your hand.
Bam.
Okay.
Feel jealous of them.
Oh, yes. Who relates to that? Say it again. Use your loud.
Jealousy, and maybe you don't want other people to feel jealous. Oh yeah, where you are.
Yes. Yes. And I would say,
Vice versa.
and the vice versa. Absolutely. Yes. So, it's okay that we don't really like to talk about failure. And in my experience, we like to do three interesting things when we're talking about failure. One, we like to ignore it completely, right? Somebody says, oh, I think we should really talk about this. And we go, you know what, I got a really bad paper cut. So, I don't really think I can talk right now. Or two, we try to reframe failure. We say, I'm really sorry about how things went with that. And we go, it's really just the universe's way of telling me it doesn't want me to be too happy. Or three, we accept failure, but then we completely shut down. And in my life, one of my most recent, really intense experiences with failure, I found myself in this place, laying on the ground in the middle of the bookstore. My children are running around the shelves, giggling and cackling and chasing and hitting one another, and I'm pulling self-help books and psychology text off, and I'm flicking through all of them trying to find an answer. And for some reason, all of them were just making me feel worse. Is that just me, or is anybody able to? Hashtag truth. And Instagram. Because you see, in my mind, like many of the women that I have interviewed, we equate failure with humility, in terms of this humiliation, pajama wearing, sitting on the couch in our robe, eating our child's peanut butter Cocoa Pops, not answering the phone from anybody who calls, because we failed. And failure publicly relates to all of those things many of you share. The shame, the humiliation. But why is that? And that's really what I wanted to understand. And, what's interesting is that when it comes to failure, some of us would do anything besides admit failure. We would do anything besides admit that our company is failing and that we need help. We would do anything besides admit that our child isn't sleeping at night and we don't know how to get them to sleep longer than 2-hour intervals. We would do anything besides admit that we are dealing with these issues that are coming up from our childhood, this shame, this trauma. And so we go to the gym and just try to run it out and instead try to beat ourselves back into happy. early on, girls and boys are socialized differently when it comes to failure. If you think about regular television right now, we were joking at lunch, some of us, about how my children have very rarely actually seen regular television, to the point that they were screaming at the top of their lungs when they discovered commercials. No idea what this was that was cutting into the Netflix. But if you think about regular television, we think about some of our most popular sitcoms. There's this thing that I like to call the Dumphy effect. Okay, if you've ever watched Modern Family, we sort of have this bubbling idiot of a man, a characterization next to the characterization of this very intelligent, very attractive, brainy woman who's often treating her partner like a third child. And she's running around behind him, solving his harebrained schemes, right? And then when I think back, and maybe some of you can relate to this, in my childhood, I have this image of my mom and my aunties and, even sometimes my grandmothers sitting around a table joking about their male counterparts. And isn't it so funny that he can't remember that conversation that we had? Isn't it so funny that he can't help with the chores? Isn't it so funny that he can't do the basic human things that we would expect a woman to do? But then those same women, all very kind church-going women, I might add, would talk about their friends. Did you see what she wore to church today? Did you see how she looked when she arrived at school drop-off? Did you see how poorly she's juggling her company and that divorce? And so what does the child, the little girl child especially, learn about failure? Don't be that person. And more importantly, that men are allowed to fail and still be loved. If a girl fails, what happens? Judgment. Pushed out. She risks losing love. And so the child mind takes that on, and that becomes a lifetime of a learned lens that we apply to our lives. Fail and risk losing love. This has played out in my own life in big and small ways. In small ways in the sense of companies that I've owned that were just not reaching the black, but I just kept beating them, failing to iterate. Relationships that I stayed in for way too long. But in the big sense, in ways that were very harmful and painful. For example, how long it took me to realize and admit to myself how being molested at the age of 5 impacted the rest of my life. Even today, I went to, who was in the first room here? Lauren. And then next door, doing the Reiki and sexual practice, Christy. Okay? My first impulse when going into that room was, I'm about to speak about women in failure. I need to seem like I've got my shit together for these women who are going to be helping me. That was my first impulse. I'm sitting down on their table to be helped, and I go, well, I'm just so damn healthy. Because God forbid they would take me seriously if I actually shared what I needed to work on when I came up here. If I shared vulnerably what I needed to work on, the idea that they would reject me the moment I got up in front of this room. Well, Lindsey ain't all that shit. That, I like envision them texting you all. She might teach it, but her sex chakra is just, I got 2 kids, all right? Leave it. Here's the thing, at the beginning of this research, I didn't sit down with women and go, hi, yeah, can you talk to me about failure and how that's played out in your life? Because as a successful failure dodger myself, that would have been akin to asking them, can you tell me what your favorite sexual position is? Which maybe would have actually been easier to ask. Missionary, What showed itself or revealed itself actually was when sitting opposite these very powerful female leaders all over the world, what was interesting for those who were successful not just in their businesses but also in their personal life was how they spoke about failure without a sense of shame. How they would just comfortably talk about their divorce or this unruly child or this business that failed and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I'm going, bless you. Bless you. Like they were sneezing all over me with these failure stories, but they were doing it quite unapologetically, excuse me. And so what was interesting was that I kept finding that the women who were more successful across the board were the ones that had almost a friend-like relationship with failure. And more importantly, their big failures, they seem to embrace and laugh about the way we might laugh about a puppy rolling in the sheets. And so here's where I want you to grab your notebook or your phone, and I want you to take some notes. Because here are the 5 things that really stood out. And if you are running a company, if you are in a relationship, if you are parenting, if you are working on a health goal or a personal development goal, here are the 5 things that I want you to be thinking about. 1, these women saw failure as an opportunity to identify failure patterns. Instead of ignoring, reframing, or succumbing to this humiliation about their failure, they use the failures as a guidepost to lead them to success. So whereas we might go, oh, here's a failure, I've done something wrong, shut down, try to ignore it, they would step into their failure and ask it what it was supposed to teach them. What am I supposed to learn from this failure? What am I supposed to turn myself towards that this failure is asking me to turn myself away from? 2, they weighted success differently at different times in their lives. So, for example, CEOs who all of a sudden added 1, 2, 3 children to their life, they would change what success looked like on this invisible scale in their mind. Same with health goals, same with personal development goals. If something over here was all of a sudden going to take the scale up over here, they would naturally level out over there. 3, they asked for, and I'm putting this in quotes, the right help. And this one was really interesting to me. So by the right help, what they would do is they would only ask for help from somebody whose life and lived experience looked like where they wanted to get to. Now, as a health practitioner who is very committed to empowering other health practitioners who identify as women, I often always ask the question to people, if I'm a woman with my lived experience as a woman, I'm going to go to a woman who has as similar as a lived experience to help me navigate to where I'm going. And so I'm always surprised, this is my bias, I'm always surprised when we as women are going to either men or to male-designed modalities, okay? So think of a coaching methodology, that modality, when that is a very different lived experience. And in coaching women at that high executive level, when we're talking about women in failure, we're understanding that there are different roadblocks for women achieving at that high level versus men achieving at that high level. Does that one make sense? Yes. The right help. 4, they learn to make their own rules. So when the community that they were within had very rigid ideas of what success for a woman should look like, they often went outside and lived on the fringe of it and made their own rules. A little bit of this. Fuck you up. Okay? 5, and perhaps the most important one, they believe they deserve it.
Yes.
Whatever it is. And I ask you all, whether you are working on a business, whether you are searching for nurturing love-based partnership, whether you are trying to instill a loving relationship with your child, whether you're working on health goals, do you believe you deserve it? Because that is the root to doing 1 through 4. And if you don't, I happen to know a handful of coaches. Put your hands up. Yes. Whole bunch of vaginas ready to help. I want to take that statement back, because that was, you can be a woman by identifying as a woman. And so I would like to own my internalized bias in that moment and rescind that comment. A bunch of women identifying coaches in the room. Find the one that meets your needs.
Yeah, girl.
Right? And we were just having this conversation. To be enlightened as fuck is not to make mistakes. It's how quickly do I identify the gap between who I want to be and what I am being in the world. Apologize by never doing it again. Okay? Coming back. When I tell you that this work has changed my life, I don't want it to be all, it's cookies and rainbows every day. Okay? Growing companies is a very challenging thing. Love-based partnership takes practice. Raising 2 humans takes practice. Okay? Especially when the 4-year-old likes to ask questions for about an hour before bed and mommy's trying to practice her talk. Like, why are yellow things yellow? I don't know. When I first really delved into this and started to see the insights coming from the research, I did what any sensible person would do. I ignored it. And I shoved it under my bed, and I ignored it some more, and I didn't talk about it very much. Because admitting that failure is the path to really achieving the vision for my life And I'm challenging you by saying that it is the path to achieving the vision for your life goes against everything that I have been taught. Absolutely everything. And even when I started to share my findings with friends, with family, with other researchers, they would say different things like, well, they're probably all ugly. These women that I'm talking about achieving at these high levels, they're probably all ugly and lonely. Or, well, but a real woman would be able to juggle everything. Or, but if I'm a woman, shouldn't I want to put myself last? You laugh, but I wonder how many of you laugh at that in person, but if you looked through your day, saw themes of that in your lived experience. How many people often put themselves last on the to-do list? Yeah? How many people feel that I'm not really achieving at that high level if I don't look a certain way? You're like, Jesus, Lindsey, why don't you just call it, just putting all my words out there? I ignored it, and I ignored it as long as I could. But the thing about the truth, and a truth that cuts through you, is that it will find its way back to the surface. Especially when you're laying on the ground in a bookstore with your children running around, and people are coming up to you and going, ma'am, yeah, so you're going to have to get your kids, and are you going to buy that book? And I'm going, oh, you're liking very loud. Do you have any kids? Right. I do love that book. I've read it multiple times. And I absolutely loved it before I had kids, and then I was like, you don't understand me. The basic underlying current here is that generally in our society, men are rewarded for taking risks. They are rewarded at that high level for innovation and quirky leadership styles, whereas women are often vilified in the media. And throughout his story, we've often painted these women as crazy. And you often hear me speak, I say, there's never been this many women like us, because 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we actually would have been burned at a stake. But now, there's an entire room of you. And you are trying to achieve at these very high levels. But you're still holding yourself, I imagine, to outdated ideals around what it is to be a woman and succeed at that high level. And to actually succeed at that high level is to wade into failure in a way that you have never imagined possible. To look back over the journey of your life and use every failure as signposts leading you to who you are, what you want, and what story you are meant to be out there telling in the world. We are living in a time where it has never been more important to have more diverse voices in leadership, in government, leading societies, reshaping the family structure, reshaping the community structure. And each of you in this room, some of you I've spoken with, and some of you I just need to look at you and know that you are meant to play an essential part in shaping this world for the better. Every single one of you. As important as each tree and each leaf on the tree, each of you has an important role to play in the next generation of leadership and in this community that we are building all together. And I truly believe that it is when we begin to rethink women and failure, and begin to rethink our own failures, that we will begin to create the world that is possible. And that if each of you were to reach your full potential, we as a society might reach ours.